You're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. My first article for the evening is an article from the Los Angeles Times, and this one's called LA is Seizing Tiny Homes from the Homeless. It's by Gail Holland. Now, the article is published about a week ago, escalating their battle to stamp out an unprecedented spread of street encampments. City officials have begun seizing tiny houses from homeless people in South Los Angeles. Elvis Summers, who built and donated the structures, removed 7 of the gaily painted wooden houses, which come with solar-powered lights and American flags, on Wednesday and Thursday ahead of a scheduled city sweep. Elvis Summers, an LA resident who says he was once homeless, had placed them within encampments on overpasses along the 110 freeway for homeless people to use instead of tents. But 3 structures impounded earlier this month remain in a city storage lot, a Bureau of Sanitation spokeswoman said, and the city notified occupants that they would be quote-unquote discarded. She said these people, Elvis Summers said these people are beaten down so hard, you give them any opportunity to be normal, it lifts them up. Councilman Curran Price, who represents the neighbourhood, said the houses pose serious health and safety risks. Just as a side, I think I've spoken about the inverse nature of the language that political people use. They make backwards statements. Actually, I think this actually falls into the Orwellian doublespeak category. So this councillor said that the houses post health and safety risks. Big question mark there. They said, I'm getting complaints from constituents who have walked into the streets to avoid them. Authorities destroyed needles, drug setups, and a gun seized from one or more of the houses and tents during an earlier cleanup. Some advocates for the homeless see these single-storey structures about the size of a garden shed as a cheap and safe alternative to having the homeless sleep on the sidewalks. Neighbours and other opponents, however, say they provide cover for lawlessness and criminal activity. They are only homes for prostitution, shooting up and smoking up, said June Ellen Richard, 54, who has lived all her life within blocks of one of the freeway overpasses where the tiny houses were parked. Mayor Eric Garcetti's spokeswoman, Connie Lanos, said he's committed. The mayor is apparently committed to getting homeless people into permanent housing and services. The never-ending story. She said, unfortunately, these structures can be hazardous to the individuals living in them and to the community at large. Right. Okay, thanks, Connie, for that. When the city took the houses, they didn't offer housing. They straight up kicked them out, said Elvis Summers. The tiny house crackdown came as the city continues to struggle to balance enforcement with housing and other aid for the burgeoning homeless population. The city passed a tough new ordinance that identified tiny houses as quote-unquote bulky items, subject to immediate confiscation. More than 30,000 people sleep on the streets of Los Angeles County. Although the city has adopted a plan to end homelessness over the next decade, what they don't say is over the next decade or 10, officials have not identified a source for the money to tackle the $2 billion problem. Elvis Summers said he has built and placed 37 tiny houses from Van Nuys to Inglewood with help from volunteers and more than $100,000 that he raised in donations from people around the world drawn to his online video campaign. He said it's not a permanent solution, but nobody's doing anything for shelter right now. Who added that the houses should default to him rather than be destroyed. They keep just saying we need permanent housing, but it never happens, he said. Price said there are alternatives, including shelters, but that people in the tiny houses reject them. Kenna Jackson, who lives in a tiny house with his wife Becky and terrier Cowboy, said officials were, quote, taking houses from people who need them right now. Their plan isn't anything. Jackson said the city hauled away homeless people's possessions while leaving bulky items. Remember the bulky items ordinance that they mentioned? Leaving bulky items like mattresses and chairs that residents dump next to the freeway. John Horton, 60, who with heavily bandaged legs where he has wounds from uncontrolled diabetes, wept silently on Wednesday as he contemplated going back to sleeping in the street. He said, laying on that tent on the sidewalk, it's impossible to keep clean. He said the staff at the Los Angeles County USC Medical Center, which discharged him on Tuesday, said they'd try to get him housing, but it would take 1 to 3 months. He said, I grew up in this neighborhood. Posted on Julia Briggs Cannon's tiny house next to the city impound notice were several flyers seeking the whereabouts of her husband, Larry Joe Cannon. Cannon, 58, said that her husband, a Vietnam-era Marine veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder and memory loss, was hospitalized with a seizure on February 5th and then disappeared. Larry Joe Cannon turned up Friday, but the couple's house was gone as Summers drove off with her house on a flatbed trailer. Julia Cannon sat on the thin bedroll on the ground and pointed to the concrete, saying, I'm staying right here, with her eyes filling with tears. Honestly, what a bloody farce this is, that people are being turned out in the streets. You know, these banks and governments and corporations have so dismally and pathetically failed, and then have the audacity to take away the tiny little bit that people get back for themselves, their tiny little wee houses that they sleep in to try to keep safe, to keep warm, and like this man here who has diabetes, and diabetes is such a terrible illness. Basically, diabetes, basically type 2 especially, is where the blood can't get to the extremities of your body, so your fingers and your toes, and therefore gangrene sets in, and therefore amputation follows shortly after. And I just think for these people to be in such a terrible, soul-destroying situation, only to have their little tiny houses stolen from them by the very people who put them in that situation, is yet another testament to how disgusting this system really is. And it's not just in one place, it's all around the world. And you're listening to Willow Willis on Fab Radio International. This is the Little River Band, the other guy.